Mr. Coovadia, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
So the voice of the private sector cannot be understated here. What impact does this B20 have in connecting the business community within the G20 governments?
Well, I think the impact is phenomenal. During the course of the year, we've had ongoing coordination with the G20, particularly the South African government and the role they're playing in the G20. I think that particularly given in today's fragmented world, today's geopolitics, the B20 is probably the most important structure that brings together C-suite business people as well as business organizations from the biggest countries and most powerful countries in the north and the south to discuss what are becoming very common issues. So when, there was a time when we talked about inequality and lack of growth and exclusion, people look towards the south. Well, these are global problems today. There's inequality in countries to the north, populations are dissatisfied at being excluded. So I think that the B20 is a tremendous forum to actually discuss those things and enable business across the G20 in a coordinated way to actually give policy input into G20 governments.
And of course, there are a number of consultations that have taken place for months now between the global business leaders, the experts, policymakers. What practical actions have actually emerged for the G20 to advance inclusive growth and sustainable development?
Well, we handed over 30 recommendations to the G20 on the 4th of September from 8 task forces. And these range from mechanisms we need to put into place and create to ensure that business drives the African continental free trade area, that we have trade systems and trade relationships that are open, that use multilateral institutions, but these multilateral institutions like the WTO, for instance, also have to be structured to reflect the changes in the global economy and the growth of economies in the South and so on. We are also looking at various issues related to finance and debt on the continent, on the African continent, and how we can enable finance to flow, how we can enable investment to flow, and how we actually look at risk on the continent, because certainly the B20 has come out with the view that often countries are rated as risky without the necessary information and data being available. So we're looking at different structures of finance as well, including the role of philanthropies, because philanthropies are showing the interest to actually invest in infrastructure. We're then looking at energy mix and making a number of recommendations on just transition issues, as well as to ensure that as we move towards cleaner energy, we also take into account the national situations of countries and their development agendas and their priorities, so that they move towards clean energy in a way that enables the economies to grow and not to actually stutter. Then we added one task force this year on industrial development and transformation. We believe that that's critical for the continent. We're making a number of recommendations on how we beneficiate the minerals we have, making a number of recommendations on our relationships with countries to the north, because we have the minerals and the energy and other resources to actually contribute to economic growth in countries in the north.
Yeah.
And so how do we actually work with those countries to industrialize the continent in a way that creates jobs, and that also enables the continent to value add and not just export raw materials.
On the issue of debt, I'm hoping that you can just expand a little bit on that, because we know there have been concerns raised, especially on this continent, around how sometimes even the funding is structured, even from national
Yeah.
institutions like the
Yeah.
IMF, the sort of conditions that are attached that sometimes are just unfair and impractical. What more conversations did you have around that?
Yeah. So again, I think the overall message on issues like that is that it's time for a reset.
Mm-hmm.
And it's time for a reset in that the multilateral institutions, and particularly multilateral financial institutions like the IMF and others, need to, one, be structured to represent and understand the global south. So let's be talking about Africa. So represent and understand the dynamics on the continent. Two, to actually look at not Africa as Africa, although obviously we want to coordinate and so on, but also understand that different economies and different countries on the continent have different dynamics and different complexities. And so the discussions on debt and how debt is going to be managed needs to be on a country-by-country basis. And then I think there's stuff for Africa to do. I think there's stuff for the continent to do. We need to ensure that we have grow our economies, organize ourselves in a way that we reduce our dependency on debt. If we have economic growth, if we begin to coordinate a bit better on some of the platform issues that we need to put together as a continent on the back of which economies grow, then I think that we playing our role and taking responsibility for reducing the need for debt on the continent. So I think that what the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force is essentially saying is that we need robust discussions with the multilateral financial institutions. We need robust discussions with the rating agencies. And we need to actually ensure that we identify the issues that are within the control and domain of countries on the continent, and we need to deal with them.
Yeah. Behind the scenes, you have had these B20 task forces that you speak of, sort of the strategic engine of B20 South Africa, developing business-driven policy recommendations that you say you've got about 30 of those that will be presented to the G20 from trade, infrastructure development, sustainable energy transition, food security. I'm interested, though, in how representative those task forces have been. How representatives were these groupings in order to reach and advance a more inclusive message?
They were very representative. So each of the task force had between 150 and 200 people per task force. Representative of the G20 countries, a representative of countries on the continent. We agreed right up front, and we had discussion with the chairs of the task forces on this, that each of the task force will also hard code the issues of SME development and women empowerment. So we had SMEs and women involved in the task forces. And if you look at the recommendations which we handed over on the 4th of September, you'll see that those recommendations talk to. So if you're talking to, let's say, digital transformation or digital infrastructure, how do we actually enable that in a way that also empowers women and enables SME growth? So not only was there representation from the G20 countries, from countries on the continent, C-suite people as well as the representatives of business organizations, but we also ensured that SMEs are there and women are there. And if you, in fact, it would be useful if you speak to some people at the summit, particularly women and SMEs that were involved, they'll confirm that. So they've been very representative. I think the chairs of the task forces have played a tremendous role in getting agreement on the recommendations. And the way we position Africa, and we put Africa at the center, but the way we position this is that Africa's growth and development is not only to the benefit of the continent, it's to the benefit of the globe, because Africa has the most arable land of any continent in the world. If that arable land produces food sustainably, we actually contribute to the food insecurity problems of the world. We have lots of resources that can actually contribute to clean energy.
Yeah.
If we do that properly, it helps the
Yeah.
energy transition of the world.
Yeah.
We have a young population. If we skill them properly, the working age population is decreasing because of an aging population. Our young people can actually fill that gap, and so on and so on.
Mm.
So we've looked for the synergies between African growth and global growth, and that's why I think the other G20 countries also were able to agree that Africa needs to be at the center, and we need to actually look at the growth and development of the continent.
Yeah. So a lot of South Africans, when we have these kind of summits, often ask themselves, okay, but how does it affect me?
Yeah.
How do I benefit? And I'm just wondering, how do you ensure as business leaders that the business recommendations are not just aspirational, but implementable, they're trackable as well? Because we're operating in very challenging global dynamics. The geopolitical fragmentation that we witness is threatening to derail the progress on these pressing economic challenges. So you need to be more intentional, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so there's two sides to this. The one side is all the work that we've done, and there's a tremendous amount of research, experience, sharing of ideas between G20 countries, sharing of what's been done and what's succeeded and what hasn't succeeded behind these recommendations. And all of that, organizations like BUSA, BLSA, and others must use all of that to see which of these recommendations can we apply in South Africa and on the continent to actually bring to scale some of the stuff that we're working on. And so we've got a lot of work to do, I believe, post the B20 to use all of the stuff that the B20 has done, because that will all be archived in BUSA as the host organization, and use all of that to actually either look at stuff that we need to do or to bring to scale stuff that we're already doing. And that must translate into inclusive growth. It must translate into improving the lives of people. The other side of that is the B20 itself. Now, the B20, like the G20, doesn't have a permanent secretary. So what's been happening is that you have the host country essentially does what it wants to do. And then it hands over the recommendations, and then nobody knows what happens to those recommendations. What we've tried to do, and it's not going to happen like immediately after the summit, but we're hoping that immediately after the summit we do actually try to hard code this. I've been talking to the previous Sherpa, the U.S. Sherpa, and I've been talking to the Confederation of British Industry, because I think Britain will take over in 2027. And to see if between these four Sherpas, Brazil, ourselves, U.S., and U.K., whether we can't put together some sort of mechanism to actually track these recommendations. So how many of these recommendations were accepted, how many were implemented, and not only that, but from those that were implemented, what has been the impact? And hopefully over a period of time that grows into some sort of a B20 secretariat, because we need that sort of continuity. B20 represents business. Business wants to see implementation, they want to see impact. And if we don't actually demonstrate that at the B20, C-suite people will lose interest, because then it becomes a talk show. So it hasn't been done in the B20 before. I have been speaking to those Sherpas. We will meet after the summit to see how we take this forward.
Okay.
But we are quite keen on putting into place some mechanism that just does track and that does measure impact. And if it's not working, bring things back and see what do we do about it.
Yeah, that's good to know. Speaking of the U.S., I mean, that country has demonstrated its disdain for South Africa's hosting of the G20 and its agenda, focusing on global equality. Have you had the participation of businesses from the U.S., and are you winning their support amid this skeptical U.S. administration?
No, absolutely. We've had U.S. C-suite people in task forces, and some of them even being co-chairs of task forces from the beginning. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, to whom we hand over, has been involved from the beginning. So U.S. business has been very supportive. Even when President Trump made his announcement 2 weeks ago that they are pulling out totally from the G20, I think the announcement was on a Friday. I said I'll wait until Monday to contact our business contacts in the U.S. to see what the impact is. I didn't have to wait. Over the weekend, they all sent me messages to say, Cas, we're on track. Don't worry about this. We will be there, and they are here. So we will do the handover tomorrow afternoon. The president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, Suzanne Clark, will be there to receive it, and will say a few words. And we'll work with them. I mean, look, it's going to be tough for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's not going to be an easy environment.
Yeah.
But where we can help, we'll help them manage that.
Okay. Cas Coovadia, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cas Coovadia is the B20 Sherpa, basically acts as the chief negotiator and coordinator responsible for developing and finalizing the B20's policy recommendations and, of course, presenting them to the G20 leadership.